When Evelyn Ward stepped off that train in Iron Creek, Montana, wearing nothing but rags and desperation, the townspeople whispered that she would be gone within a week, already judging her as they watched her move across the platform like a shadow that had somehow taken human form. They had no idea what Caleb Rohr saw in those hollow eyes, no understanding that beneath the exhaustion and the hunger, there burned a quiet, steady fire that matched the one he had been trying to smother in his own chest for years. This is the story of a woman who arrived with nothing, and a man who learned that worth is not measured in gold or finery or reputation, but in the courage to rebuild from ashes and keep standing when life has tried again and again to knock you to your knees. Stay with me until the end, and when the story is over, tell me in the comments what city you are watching from, because I want to see just how far this journey from a small, dusty corner of Montana can travel across the world. The afternoon sun hung low over the Montana Territory in the autumn of 1883, casting long, slanting shadows across the railway platform of Iron Creek and turning the worn boards and rusted rails into something that looked almost beautiful, even though the air already held the thin edge of coming cold. It was the kind of light that made everything appear both lovely and desolate at the same time, golden yet cold, promising and empty in the same breath. Caleb Rohr stood with his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his coat, his weathered face set in a hard, unreadable line, as he watched the black locomotive crawl into the station, metal screeching against metal and steam billowing up like the breath of some ancient beast that had hauled too many stories and too much grief across too many miles. He did not want to be there. In his 34 years, he had learned that wanting things usually led to losing them, and his history of wanting was nothing more than a list of ghosts. He had wanted his parents to survive that winter fever, but they had not. He had wanted his younger brother Thomas to stay away from the bottle, but Thomas had not. He had wanted the ranch to carry on smoothly after Thomas died, and left behind an 8-year-old boy who barely spoke. But the ranch had slipped toward ruin, no matter how he tried to hold it together with his bare hands. Now here he was, standing on a splintered platform in a town that gossiped more than it worked, waiting for a stranger to step into his broken life because he could no longer manage it alone. A mail-order bride, the agency had called her in the letters, although in his mind the words tasted bitter and wrong. He did not want a bride in any romantic sense, he told himself. He wanted help, a pair of steady hands and a quiet voice that could reach a boy who had shut down and a house that had forgotten how to feel like a home. The train hissed to a stop, brakes whining, iron clanking, and the passengers began to spill, out in ones and twos. Caleb watched them carefully, more out of habit than interest. A merchant in a fine suit with a polished valise and the look of a man annoyed by dust. 2 miners, still streaked with the gray and brown of whatever hole they had been digging in. An elderly couple leaning into each other as they navigated the steep steps, their movements slow and practiced from a lifetime of doing everything together. Then he saw her. She emerged from the third-class car like a shadow suddenly made solid, her figure thin and straight in a dress that barely deserved the name, more a collection of patched fabric held together by determination and thread than a garment someone should be traveling in. The hem was torn and muddy, the sleeves frayed at the edges, and the boots on her feet were split at the seams and wrapped in twine as if hope and a few loops of string could keep them from falling apart entirely. A thin shawl, more holes than wool, was wrapped tightly around her shoulders against the September chill, its failure to keep out the cold written in the faint tremor of her fingers. Yet it was not her clothing that made Caleb's breath catch in his throat. Even from 20 feet away, even beneath the shadow of a worn bonnet that had seen too many seasons, he could see her eyes. They were dark and deep and, to his surprise, absolutely unbroken. She moved with the careful dignity of someone who had lost almost everything but had refused, stubbornly, and perhaps irrationally, to lose herself. Her spine stayed straight despite the obvious exhaustion in the way she stepped down from the train, her chin lifted in quiet defiance despite the fact that the whispers around her had already begun. "That's her," old Mrs. Henderson stage whispered to her daughter, loud enough for half the platform to hear and savor. "That's the woman Caleb Rohr sent for." Her daughter muttered a mortified, "Mother, hush," but it was far too late. "Good Lord, she looks like she's been living in a ditch," the older woman added, and the ugly assessment hung in the air like smoke. Caleb saw the exact moment Evelyn heard those words. He noticed the slight flinch, almost too small for anyone else to catch. The tightening around her mouth, the way her hands shifted on the handle of her single battered carpet bag, gripping it just a little tighter, as if bracing herself against more than just the wind. She did not stop walking, did not lower her gaze or change her path. Instead, she came toward him with a measured, purposeful stride, and when she reached him, she set down her bag at her feet and met his eyes directly. "You must be Mr. Rohr," she said. Her voice was soft but steady, carrying the faint remnants of an Eastern accent that hinted at streets and stone buildings far from this rough wooden platform. Boston, perhaps, or Philadelphia, somewhere with libraries and gas lamps and the kind of life that did not prepare you for Montana dust. "Call me Caleb," he replied, removing his hat with a movement that felt strangely formal for a man who spent most of his days covered in sweat and dirt. Up close, he saw that she was younger than he had expected, 25, maybe 26, but her face held the weary lines of someone who had lived through more than the years could account for. "You had a good journey, Miss Ward?" "It was adequate," she said simply, the single word carrying a world of restraint. "Thank you for meeting me." He almost laughed at that, at the idea of 3 days on a train in that dress, traveling from who knew where, being described as merely adequate, as if she had just stepped off a streetcar after a short trip across town, as if standing in a strange place, in front of a strange man wearing clothes that would embarrass a beggar, was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "That all you've got?" he asked, nodding at the carpetbag. "Yes." No explanation, no apology, just that one quiet syllable that somehow felt heavier than the bag itself. Caleb picked it up and was startled by how little it weighed, a life reduced to almost nothing. He gestured toward his waiting wagon. "Come on, then. The ranch is about an hour outside town. We should get moving before dark settles in." They walked through the small knot of onlookers together, and he could feel every eye on them, the gossip already racing ahead of them like a grass fire in dry brush. He knew exactly what they were thinking, that Caleb Rohr, the proud rancher who had barely spoken to anyone since his brother died, had finally cracked and sent away for a beggar woman to tend his run-down house and his half-orphaned nephew. It would be the talk of Iron Creek for weeks. Let them talk, he thought, as he helped Evelyn up onto the wagon bench. Talk never fixed a fence, never broke a horse, never put a meal on the table. Her hand was cold even through the thin, worn gloves as he helped her up, and he felt the small tremor in her bones. He climbed up beside her, clicked his tongue to set the horses into motion, and together they rolled away from the station, leaving the whispers and the curious stares behind them, though both of them knew the echo of those judgments would follow. For the first several miles, neither of them spoke. The wagon jolted along the rutted road that wound through stretches of sparse grassland, past abandoned claim stakes and half-collapsed shacks that told their own stories of men with big dreams and not enough luck, past the occasional weathered fence that marked the boundaries between one hard life and another. The mountains rose in the distance, purple and imposing against a sky that was already deepening toward evening. Caleb kept his eyes on the road, yet he remained acutely aware of the woman sitting beside him, aware of the way she held herself with perfect posture despite the rough jostling of the wagon, aware of how she seemed to be drinking in the landscape, with those watchful eyes, memorizing the emptiness and the possibility in it. At last, she was the one who broke the silence. "Your letter said you needed help with your nephew," she said, her tone calm, as if she were asking about the weather rather than the center of his life. "How old is the boy?" "Ben's 8, Caleb answered. "He'll be 9 come December." "And his parents?" His jaw tightened before the words came, the old ache rising like it always did when someone touched that wound. "His mother died, bringing him into the world," he said. "His father, my brother Thomas, died 6 months ago, riding accident officially." He hesitated, then decided there was no point in pretending with this woman, not when she already knew enough of desperation to answer an advertisement like his. But he'd been drinking. He drank too much, especially after his wife passed. The ranch went to hell while he was drowning himself in whiskey, and when he finally killed himself falling off his horse in a drunken stupor, he left me with a broken-down property and a boy who hasn't spoken more than 10 words at a stretch since the funeral. He had never said it so bluntly before, never laid it all out without softening the edges. Yet something about this stranger in rags with the bearing of a queen made him want to speak the truth without varnish. Evelyn was quiet for a moment, absorbing it. "I'm sorry for your losses," she said at last, "and I'm sorry for Ben's." "The boy needs a woman's hand," Caleb continued, words coming easier now that they had started. "He needs someone who can give him the kind of attention I can't while I'm trying to keep the ranch from falling apart completely. I can cook basic meals and mend basic tears, but I can't give him a home, not the way a child needs. I need someone who can." "I understand," she said. There was no pity in her voice, only comprehension, as if she knew that kind of need from the inside. "The letter explained the arrangement," he added, suddenly awkward. "You'd help with Ben in the household. In exchange, you'd have room, board, and a small salary when I can spare it. I'm not looking for a wife in the romantic sense, Miss Ward. I'm looking for help." "I understand," she repeated, and this time there was a faint edge of wryness in her tone. "And I'm not looking for romance, Mr. Rohr. I'm looking for a roof that doesn't leak and a place where I don't have to lie awake wondering what tomorrow will take from me. We both need something. That seems like a fair foundation for an arrangement." He glanced at her then, really looked, his eyes tracing the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the slight hollows in her cheeks that testified to too many missed meals, the way the dress hung loosely on a frame that had once been fuller. Yet he also saw the set of her shoulders, the steadiness in her gaze, the quiet strength that lived in every line of her body. "What happened to you?" he asked before he could stop himself, then immediately shook his head. "I'm sorry, that's not my business." "It's all right," Evelyn said softly. She turned her head to look at the mountains, and something in her expression shifted, becoming at once harder and more fragile. "I was married for 3 years," she began. "My husband was a clerk in Philadelphia, a good man, a kind man. We had a small house and a small life, and I was content with that. Then the fever came through, yellow fever, and it took him in 4 days." Her hands folded carefully in her lap as she continued, each word measured. "When he died, I discovered he had been borrowing money to pay for things he never told me about. Doctors for his mother, debts from his father's failed business, all of it hidden because he wanted to protect me from worry. His creditors came for everything: the house, the furniture, my mother's silver, even my wedding dress. They left me with the clothes I was wearing and a single bag." She took a breath that shook only slightly. "I stayed with my sister for a while, but her husband made it plain I wasn't welcome." "Another mouth to feed," he said. "So I left." "Where did you go?" Caleb asked, his voice quieter now. "Wherever I could," she answered. "I worked in a factory for a time, but the foreman expected more than labor from the women under his employ." Her hands tightened in her lap, knuckles pale under the skin. When I refused, he dismissed me. After that, I found whatever work I could, washing, mending, cleaning, barely enough to keep me fed and housed. One day I saw an advertisement for mail-order brides in a newspaper someone left on a bench. I had never considered such a thing before, but desperation makes you weigh choices you once thought unthinkable. She looked at him again, eyes steady. So I answered one. Caleb nodded slowly. He understood desperation. It had been his companion for months now as he tried to juggle a failing ranch and a grieving child while his own grief gnawed at the edges of his sanity. "I won't expect more than what we agreed," he said firmly. "You help with Ben in the house. You'll have a place here. That's the arrangement. You have my word on it." "Thank you," she said quietly, and he heard the sincerity in those two words as clearly as if she had given him a speech. They rode in silence for another mile, the wagon creaking, the horse's breath steaming in the cooling air. Then Caleb cleared his throat. "Fair warning," he said. "The ranch isn't much to look at. Thomas let it go pretty bad these last few years, and I've been trying to fix things while also running cattle and keeping Ben alive. The house needs work. The barn needs work. Even the well needs work. It's probably not what you might have expected." "Mr. Roar," Evelyn replied, and now he heard the faintest hint of dry humor in her voice. "I arrived wearing rags and carrying everything I own in a bag that weighs less than a newborn calf. My expectations are remarkably modest." Despite the weight of the day and the heaviness in his chest, Caleb felt his mouth twitch toward a smile. "Fair point," he admitted. As they crested the final ridge, the ranch came into view below them. Even in the twilight, he could see it with brutal honesty. The house with its sagging porch and missing shingles, the barn with its damaged roof, the fences sagging or broken in a dozen places, the garden plot overgrown with weeds where his mother's vegetables had once grown in neat, proud rows. It looked exactly like what it was, a place that had been neglected, that had suffered, that was barely holding on. He felt Evelyn go still beside him. "That's it," he said flatly. "That's the ranch." She was quiet for such a long moment that he almost braced himself for the words, "Turn around," already prepared to take her back to town and put her on the next train east if she asked. He would not have blamed her. But when she finally spoke, her tone was thoughtful rather than dismayed. "It has good bones," she said. "The house is solid, even if it needs repair. The barn can be fixed. The land is good. I can see that even in this fading light. It's not broken, Mr. Roar, it's just tired. There's a difference." Something in Caleb's chest loosened, just slightly, like a belt notch let out after being cinched too tight. "You see all that, do you?" he asked. "I do." She turned to look at him, and in the dying light her eyes were steady and sure. "I know what it's like to be tired but not broken. I recognize it when I see it." They descended the ridge into the gathering darkness. As they approached the house, the front door opened and a small, thin figure appeared on the porch. Ben, wary and watchful, stood in the doorway, his shoulders drawn tight, his eyes carrying the caution of a child who had learned that good things often left without warning. Caleb brought the wagon to a stop and climbed down, then moved around to help Evelyn descend. She gathered her carpetbag and shawl, and together they walked toward the porch. "Ben," Caleb said, keeping his voice gentle, "this is Miss Evelyn Ward. She's come to help us out for a while. Miss Ward, this is my nephew, Ben Roar." Evelyn looked down at the boy, and Caleb watched something shift in her face. A softening, a recognition, as if she saw something in his guarded expression that matched something inside herself. She did not crouch down or speak in the artificial, bright tone many adults used with children. Instead, she simply inclined her head with the same respect she might offer another adult. "Hello, Ben," she said quietly. "I'm pleased to meet you." Ben stared at her for a long moment, taking in the worn dress, the frayed shawl. the tired lines around her eyes. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "You look sad." Caleb tensed, ready to correct him for what most would call rudeness. But Evelyn lifted a hand, stopping him before he could speak. "I am sad," she answered honestly. "I've had some hard times lately, but I'm hoping being here might help with that. Do you think it might?" Ben considered this with a seriousness far beyond his years, then shrugged one thin shoulder. "Maybe. It's pretty quiet here. Uncle Caleb says quiet is good for thinking." "Your uncle is a wise man," Evelyn replied, the corner of her mouth lifting slightly as she glanced at Caleb. "I think I'm going to like it here." Caleb led them inside, lighting lamps as they went. The house, at least, was clean. He had made sure of that, scrubbing until his knuckles were raw. But it was also sparse and plainly missing a woman's touch. The main room served as both kitchen and living space, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. A rough-hewn table with 4 mismatched chairs stood in the center of the room, and the furniture, what little there was simple, worn, and purely practical. Stairs climbed along one wall to 3 small bedrooms above. "I'll show you to your room," Caleb said, picking up her carpet bag again. "It's not much, but it's got a good bed and a window that catches the morning light. Ben and I are in the other 2 rooms upstairs. There's a washroom out back, and we've got a pump in the kitchen for water." He led her up the narrow stairs to the smallest of the 3 rooms. It held a simple bed with a plain quilt, a small dresser with a cracked mirror, and a wooden chair by the window. The walls were bare, the floorboards worn but scrubbed. Evelyn stood in the doorway for a long moment, and Caleb found himself inexplicably holding his breath, waiting for her judgment. "It's perfect," she said at last. "It's half empty and needs paint," Caleb pointed out, almost defensive. "It's mine," Evelyn replied, turning toward him with a calm certainty that surprised him. "That makes it perfect." She set her carpetbag on the bed and turned back, and in the lamplight he could see the deep exhaustion etched into her face, the way she held herself as if every muscle had to remember how to stand. "I'll let you get settled," he said. "There's water in the pitcher on the dresser. Come down when you're ready and I'll heat up some stew for supper." "Mr. Rohr," she said, stopping him at the door. "Thank you for this, for taking a chance on someone who arrived with nothing." Caleb looked at her, standing there in her ragged dress in that bare little room, and something in his chest shifted again, something slow and cautious and unfamiliar. "You didn't arrive with nothing, Miss Ward," he said quietly. "You arrived with yourself. That's something." He left before she could answer, closing the door gently behind him. Downstairs, Ben sat at the table, bent over a scrap of paper with a stub of pencil, drawing something that might have been a horse or a storm cloud or both. He looked up when Caleb entered. "Is she staying?" the boy asked. "That's the plan," Caleb replied, moving to the stove to stir the pot of stew he had left simmering. "She's going to help out around here, help take care of you, help with the house. Think you can be good for her?" Ben nodded slowly. "She looks like she needs help too," he said after a moment. Out of the mouths of children, Caleb thought. The boy was right. Evelyn Ward looked like she had been through hell and somehow walked out the other side, but only barely. She looked like someone who needed rest and peace and time to heal just as much as the ranch needed repairs, and Ben needed mothering. "Maybe we can all help each other," Caleb said. When Evelyn came downstairs some 20 minutes later, she had removed her bonnet and shawl, revealing dark hair pulled back into a simple bun. She had washed her face and hands, but she still wore the same ragged dress because, of course, it was probably all she owned. Caleb felt a quiet, unexpected resolve settle in him. Tomorrow he would press money into her hand and send her to town for fabric. She could sew. Most women could. And she deserved something better than rags. They ate supper in near silence, the three of them around the table under the warm glow of the lamp. The stew was basic but filling, beef, potatoes, carrots, and onion floating in a thin broth that at least tasted of effort. Evelyn ate slowly and methodically, like someone who had learned how to stretch small meals as far as possible, and Ben watched her with open curiosity while Caleb found himself watching them both, wondering what exactly he had invited into his life. After supper, Evelyn insisted on washing the dishes despite the obvious fatigue in the set of her shoulders. Caleb did not argue. He was already learning that this woman had a particular kind of pride, the kind that came from clinging to dignity when everything else had been stripped away. "Ben," he said when the dishes were nearly done, "time for bed." The boy nodded and rose, then surprised them both by walking over to the wash basin where Evelyn stood. "Good night, Miss Ward," he said quietly. She dried her hands, turned, and offered him a smile that was the first truly genuine one Caleb had seen from her. Soft, real, and edged with a faint, lingering sadness. "Good night, Ben," she replied. "Sleep well." After the boy had gone upstairs, Caleb and Evelyn remained in the kitchen, the silence between them no longer heavy or awkward, but full of things that did not yet have words. "I'll be up before dawn," Caleb said eventually. "I've got cattle to check and fences to mend. You don't need to rise that early. Sleep as long as you need. Ben usually wakes around 6 and will need breakfast. After that, the day is yours to figure out. Like I said, the house needs work, but pace yourself, there's no rush." "I'm used to rising early," Evelyn said. "I'll be up with you." "You don't have to," he began. "Mr. Roar," she interrupted gently, and there was unmistakable steel beneath the softness of her voice. "I came here to work, to help, to earn my place. I won't do that by sleeping late and taking leisurely breakfasts. I'll be up with you, and I'll do what needs doing. That was the arrangement we made." Caleb studied her for a moment. This woman who had arrived in rags, yet now stood in his kitchen with the bearing of a general preparing for a difficult campaign. "All right," he said. "If you insist, but if you need rest, you take it. Understood?" "Understood," she replied, though they both knew she had no intention of allowing herself much rest any time soon. "Good night, then, Miss Ward," he said, turning toward the stairs. "Good night, Mr. Roar," she answered, "and thank you again." He paused, one hand on the banister. "Stop thanking me," he said, not unkindly. "You're working for your keep. It's a fair exchange." "Perhaps," she murmured, "but some fair exchanges are still worth gratitude." That night, Caleb lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling of his room and listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch, the wind pressing against the windows, the distant lowing of cattle, the creak of old wood settling. But now there was something new. The almost inaudible footsteps of a woman moving in the room next to Ben's, the faint rustle of fabric as she prepared for bed, the soft silence that followed. He had brought a stranger into his home, into his life, into his nephew's fragile world. A woman who had arrived with nothing, who looked half-starved and wholly exhausted, who wore rags and carried everything she owned in a bag that weighed almost nothing. Yet when he closed his eyes, what he saw were not the rags or the hollows in her cheeks. He saw those eyes again, dark and deep and absolutely unbroken. And as the moon rose high over the Montana territory, casting silver light across a ranch that had once been thriving and was now merely surviving, Caleb found himself thinking a thought that felt dangerous in its tenderness. Maybe this was not a mistake. Maybe this broken ranch and this broken woman and this broken man and this wounded boy might somehow help each other heal. Or maybe, he told himself, it was just desperate hope speaking. Time, as always, would tell. In the smallest bedroom, Evelyn Ward lay in a real bed for the first time in months, staring up at a plain wooden ceiling and feeling something she had almost forgotten how to name. It was not happiness, Not yet, but it was possibility. And after everything she had lost, everything she had endured, possibility felt almost like a miracle. Outside, the wind whispered, through the grass, carrying the promise of autumn and winter and whatever came beyond. Inside, 3 hearts beat in the darkness, each one carrying its own burden, each one quietly hoping that tomorrow might be better than today. The story was only just beginning.